to be here today. I would like to thank the organizers before we start the Salon de Développement Canado-Maghrébin to give the opportunity to the Canadian Muslim Forum to co-develop and animate this panel with our great panelists, but also the organizers. So before I present myself, I would like to tell you, the stories of discrimination and racism in our community are numerous. The story of Dr. Alami in this brochure that faced discrimination when she wanted to find a job as a dentist. The story of Manal, a friend of mine who came and saw me last week to tell me that at work, she's a Quebecer, Canadian, Muslim faith, black woman in the bathroom, someone telling her that this veil she's wearing must be so uncomfortable and unpractical at work. And these are hate incidents. And unfortunately, several hate crimes touching the Muslim community, and not to mention the terrorist attack in Quebec. So this is why we're here today, to talk about the rise of racism in our community, but most importantly, actions that we can put in place to counter Islamophobia, but also all kinds of discrimination. My name is Kathy Malas. I'm the Vice President of the Canadian Muslim Forum. I would like to present to you our panelists that will talk about these issues. Are we talking briefly in a minute? Why are we talking about this issue? Numbers speak. So Statistique Canada last year in 2015 declared a raise of hate crimes in Canada of 5%, touching, again, unfortunately, Arabs, Asians, and black community mostly. And this is for ethnic crimes. And about religious hate crimes, unfortunately, 61% increase for the Muslim community with Islamophobia. So it's a sad reality. It is a reality. The National Assembly passed a motion, a unanimous motion, and also Parliament, two motions. First one recognizing Islamophobia as a real phenomenon, and a second one asking for a study and concrete actions to be taking place to counter Islamophobia. So that's the why. Why are we talking about the race? There's facts. Now, why is it important to talk about it? Impact of Islamophobia and systematic racism against any kind of community has an impact on two things. Number one, this is why we're here today, employment, l'employabilité. It has an impact on our community, and Dr. Alami's story is one of the examples. It also has an impact on self-esteem and the sense of belonging in the community. We can only be active. A capitalist society like ours can only be economically viable if the well-being and health of our citizens are good. And racism has an impact on well-being. So this is what we're here today. So let me present to you quickly our panelists. So for the next 35 minutes, every single panelist will present to you their vision on how we can counter Islamophobia and all sorts of discrimination in 5 minutes. And then I'll ask maybe two questions that they can answer. So let me present to you Frank Baylis. Frank Baylis is the MP of Pierrefonds and the Liberal Party. So député de Pierrefonds. Yeah, we can applaud them. Hassan, he's a lawyer, also an engineer, and Imam. So we have Samir Majzoub, the president of the Canadian Muslim Forum. And Graham Carpenter, he's the office manager at the Honorable Thomas Mulcair and also candidate in Projet Montrèal in the district of Darlington. 30 seconds on the Canadian Muslim Forum. We promote, our vision and mission is to promote civic engagement. How? By mobilizing youth and non-youth and the importance of being active through volunteering on all levels of society, political, media, and societal level. We promote common interest and fight any kinds of injustice, including racism and Islamophobia. So let me pass the talk to Frank. Frank, so could you present us on your vision of how can we counter this rise of racism within our society?
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, everybody, for this opportunity to speak on a really critically important issue, not just for Canada, but let's talk about, it's a world issue right now. And there's an old saying that all it takes for evil to succeed is for good people to do nothing. So, when we talk about combating Islamophobia, we must do something. If we do nothing and just sit in our homes or accept it, this is not acceptable. Good people must stand up. And it's not always easy. It's not always easy to stand up against racism, against discrimination, because you'll be targeted. as we've seen, and it's almost inconceivable after what happened in Quebec City, where 6 men are murdered for no reason other than their faith. This happened in Canada. It's something that bothers me tremendously to this day. And when you think, okay, after such a horrific incident, things might settle down, we see a few weeks ago a car bombing here in Canada. This is incredible, and it's unacceptable. And I think that with the discourse that's out there in the public, it's critically important for the leadership, whether it's federal, provincial, or municipal leaders, imams, civic leaders, to stand up and be very, very clear that we do not accept this intolerance in any way, shape, or form. It doesn't mean we'll stop it all, but the leadership from A to Z and the population must stand up strongly against it, and that's what I'm doing.
Thank you, Frank. Samer?
Okay. Actually, through our experience in countering or facing xenophobia, racism, and in particular Islamophobia, and here I would like to open the quotation. When we focus on Islamophobia, does not mean in any way we are neglecting the other sorts and forms of racism, such as anti-racial profiling or any sort of racism or discrimination are refused in all its forms. Now, the focus in Islamophobia, because we all agree, and it has been proven that it is an issue that is facing our country, province, and the world in general nowadays. The proposal or the suggestions what we have witnessed is really so far acting as an obstacle to solve those issues is the strong will or the strong political will to address all sorts of discrimination and racism. And this is what we have been calling at the Canadian Muslim Forum and as civic advocates. For many years, our main objective has been or had been to recognize, to let the society, the media, the politicians recognize that there is a problem. Now, no one can deny it except those who would like to be denying everything. This is another issue. But in reality, it exists. And we have seen it, whether in the terrorist attack in Quebec, on the daily issues that we face in markets, in job markets and other places, and especially in the media also. Now, so what is really needed is a political will. And I will be very brief. What does it mean, a political will? I will give 2 quick examples. One we have been directly implicated with is the Islamophobia file at the federal level, where there was a political will first started very bluntly, very openly with Thomas Mulcair during the elections, the federal elections, where he stood up to fight Islamophobia openly, out loudly, and many analysts say he has paid a political price because of his principled position. We add up to this Frank Baylis, a friend, a gentleman, an MP of Pierrefonds, who also stood up against Islamophobia by assisting and being the top front of creating a petition to fight Islamophobia. We come back to, or we proceed, or we go forward to speak about adaptation of Islamophobia at the federal level. And we all see how certain political parties tried their best to destroy this movement, and we see Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party and the government took a principled position. And I will give a last example on this very quickly. It has to do with the cemetery in Quebec City. In the cemetery in Quebec City, we all know what happened, all this big fuss over a very basic right of any human being to be buried or to bury his loved person or his loved relatives in a place in a respectful way. We have all these Islamophobic incidents that associated and statements and media-wise. When the first attempt failed, right away we see the Premier of Quebec, M. Philippe Couillard, coming out and speaking loudly that the Muslim community has to have a cemetery. In a few days only, in just a few days, this issue was solved without any problem. And Sheikh Hassan can speak about this because he was heavily involved in this. So this is where we say there is a political will that is needed. We need to have a creative media that really be very careful and not to play games. We need to have implication from our community to be implicated, outreach. There is no worries to be part of this society and to be proud to be Quebecers and Canadian. And we should have it at a civic and civil levels where schools, educations, and researchers really, everyone has to work hard to come together to fight such a phenomenon.
Thank you so much. Graham, what is your vision on that? You were very active and still are the office manager of Thomas Mulcair on a federal level, and now candidate in Projet Montréal. So what is your vision on that to counter the rise of racism on a federal and even a local level, municipal level?
Thanks, Kathy. I would echo what Samer was just saying, and in a more specific sense. Obviously, I'm very lucky to have been mentored by someone like Thomas Mulcair for the last 13 years. You'll remember in 2013, during the Charter of Values debate, Mr. Mulcair, as the leader of the NDP, came out and said that the NDP would defend free of charge any woman who lost her job because she wore a hijab in the public service. And then, obviously, in 2015, when the court case came down about a woman wearing a hijab while she takes her, a niqab while she takes her citizenship oath, the judgment came down and all political leaders were asked their opinions and asked to state those opinions. And Mr. Mulcair, refusing to make victims of vulnerable and marginalized women in our society, simply quoted the spirit of the Canadian Charter of Values, and that is that the state does not tell a woman what she can and cannot wear, period. Now, we fast forward to what's going on today. We need still, and we will always need, politicians who are willing to stand up. And if you are not going to think about the most vulnerable and the most marginalized people in our society, then you are not following the spirit of our charters of values, be they of Quebec or of Canada. And I look at what is going on in Quebec City right now with this Loi 62, and I find it fascinating. The Minister of Justice was asked a few weeks ago whether a woman with her face covered would be allowed on a city bus, and she was unable to answer that question. And I think we've become to realize more and more that the answer is indeed no under this law. But so here we are again in the context of an election where the most marginalized and vulnerable people in our society are being used as a political hockey puck. And the truth of the matter is that if you read the Charter, every time a law is written, and some of you might not know this, but any time a law is written at the federal level, at the provincial level, and there is the slightest doubt that law could infringe on the charter values, the charter rights of citizens, there is an avis de conformité, there is a legal opinion that is drawn out by legal experts through the Justice Department. And if anybody thinks, and I'm not a lawyer by training, but I've read the charters, I know what they say, and if anybody thinks, having read those charters, that law is respectful of the spirit of our charters, our Quebec and our Canadian charters, I'd very much like to hear their legal opinion on that matter. And I think that if we go and ask the government and the parties that are looking at this and ask them what came down in the legal and the avis de conformité that they did when they studied this law, but they're doing it during an electoral process. And they're doing it, in my opinion, this is my view of things, but I think it is to inoculate themselves against a xenophobic and an Islamophobic attitude in our society and playing to that attitude. And that is what we cannot accept. We need to demand more from our political leaders. We need to remember that if those political leaders are putting their own interests before the interests of the citizens that they are supposed to protect, that they are not in the business of public service, they are in the business of self-service. And that is something that we need to up the bar, and the political pressure is extremely important. The only other issue that I would want to mention too is the level of engagement and how we promote our bridge builders. There are fantastic women and men working in our society who build bridges, be it Samer and Kathy at the Canadian Muslim Forum, be it Haroun Bouazi with Amal Quebec, be it Shahad Salman, who is a young lawyer who is now sitting with the city of Montreal and with the Barreau du Québec on human rights. She now actually is a member of the Committee on Human Rights for the Montreal Holocaust Museum. These are the branchings out that are happening, and we need to encourage that and foster it in our young people and in our organizations as much as it's possible. And it is there that we will actually build, and it will be seamless. We won't see it happening, but slowly this reality that we're living in Quebec right now with Islamophobia that we have seen in different forms earlier, right? The Jewish community has had difficulty at various points, the English community, the First Nations, the Irish when they got here, etc. These tendencies towards fear, these tendencies towards hatred have existed before, and they have manifested themselves before. And now it is the Muslim community that is bearing the brunt, and in a terrible way. And we can get through this, but it is by branching out and building bridges between communities. And so people that are working on those projects should get all of our support.
Thank you, Graham.
Thank you, Graham.
Thank you. So, Imam Hassan, as an Imam and also a very active citizen, what is your input on that?
First of all, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, of being here and for the invitation. And I have to admit, it's very difficult to be the last one to speak in a panel, especially if you share the same opinions with all the others. I try to come with something new, but it will be very difficult because I share all what was said before. To start with, one of the definitions of insanity is to do exactly the same thing and expect different result. So if we are happy with what we saw, fine. If we are not happy with what we saw, especially on the 29th of January, it's about time to reflect and to think. Because if we continue on the same path, we are going to produce the same tragedy in the future. I don't think anybody in this room or anybody who's hearing us later on video will say that, yes, we are happy with what happened. 6 citizens were killed just because they belong to a faith that somebody does not like. When we stand up against Islamophobia, we are not only defending the right of Muslims. Actually, we are defending the future of Canada. Because when you see the fire in the house of your neighbor, when you help your neighbor putting off the fire, you are not helping him. Don't expect thank you. He may say thank you, but you are helping yourself because the fire at your neighbor's house will reach your house. And this is what's happening. Racism, or it does not have, terrorism and racism does not have a religion, does not have a faith, does not have a nationality. Racism and terrorism are a crime, period, a hate crime. Now, how we can change? There are 4 players, many players, but generally I see them as 4. Our political leadership on the 3 levels, the media, the common citizen, like you and me, and 4th, the real victim, the immediate victim, who are the Canadian or Quebecers of Muslim faith. Let us start with the political leadership, because I have my good neighbor here. And I'm not directing him because of him, he's doing a good job. Thank him. I'm proud to be with him. The leadership, first of all, the leadership have to recognize that we have a problem. If you don't realize you have a problem, you don't look for a solution. Recognizing that the problem is half the solution. Many times we heard many politicians resisting the idea of putting an investigation against Islamophobia or having laws, and even the Motion 103, that we fought very hard for that. And Motion 103 was not a law. It was only, please, could you take a look to see if there is a problem, and if there is a problem, we'll try to do something. Even that, Certain politicians stood up against that. And as long as we don't recognize there is a problem, we are not going to find a solution. So our political leadership have to stand up, say, yes, we are here, as my friend here said, not for self-service, but for the public service, and they have a duty to defend the right, safety, and the future of all the citizens, regardless of their religion. This is the first thing. Certain people say, well, this will infringe on our freedom of speech. No, we are not against freedom of speech. Actually, as a minority, we are the first people to defend the freedom of speech. Because when the freedom of speech is limited, the first victims are the minority, religious minority and ethnic minority as well. So the freedom of speech actually is to defend the minority, and there is, I don't think any person of his right mind will work against freedom of speech if he's a minority. This is the first thing. As I'm saying, the politicians. Many people say, well, we are here in Quebec. Yes, sir. Yes, madam. I know that you are in Quebec. Thank you for reminding me that, because maybe I'm slow to understand, but maybe in 43 years, I had enough time to understand that I'm in Quebec. And exactly because I'm in Quebec, I'm standing up for my rights. Because I know Quebec is a society of law. Quebec is a place where freedom is respected. Quebec is a place where equality is respected. Quebec is a place where a human being is a human being. And this is why we say we want to defend our freedom, our right of choice, our life to live, our right to live, because we are in Quebec. So this is the role of our leadership. The role of the media. We know, I think many of you remember what I said in Quebec, we want to make sure that the after 29th of January should be completely different of what was before the 29th of January. And at that time, those of you who remember, I said, Alexandre Bissonnette, before being a killer, he was a victim. And before planting his bullets in the chest of his victims, there were words more dangerous than bullets that was planted in his head. And I still go by that. And I'm glad that so many people contact me to say, yes, you are right. But we want to make sure, yes, Alexandre Bissonnette was a victim, but we want to make sure that he's the last victim. And this is why the media have a role to play. Words are very, very important. And media, before, they were doing some amalgamation, some guilt by association. If there is a Muslim somewhere in Paris or in Indonesia or in Lebanon who does something, they take all Muslims to be responsible. No. There are 1.5 billion Muslims around the world. Many of us, those of you who are parents, know that even controlling your own kids at home, it's so difficult. Imagine if to come to somebody like me and say, well, you know what? Control 1.5 billion Muslims around the world, and then we'll give you your right. It's nonsense. So Muslims are not responsible of what certain crazy people do around the world, regardless if they are Muslim or Jew or without a religion. These people who are doing criminal things are criminals. It should be dealt with them as criminals, period. And reporters should not associate an innocent citizen here with a criminal guy who does something in Europe or America or everywhere else. And by the way, Muslims around the world are by far more victims of the act of certain terrorist act in the world than non-Muslims. Take a look at what's happening in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Libya. I don't need to give all the countries. Muslims are more victims than anybody else. So please leave Muslims alone. And actually many Muslims came here to flee the atrocities of terrorists. So don't penalize them. Like if like coming to a victim of incest and say, you know what, your dad is a nasty man and we are going to punish you for that. Hey, guys, I'm his victim. So this is why the media, they have a role to play. The third players, I spoke about two players, there are two to go. The majority of people. I keep saying we are a silent majority. A silent majority because I know that Quebec society is not a racist society. Canadian society is not a racist society. There are certain bad elements who are trying to influence the decision around the country, and people who are looking from outside. I'm being interviewed by media from outside, and they say they think that the whole Quebec is racist. I say no. I keep defending the situation in Quebec in front of the outsiders, because they think because what they hear only the noisy ones, and the majority. If you go to social media, this is what you'll see. The bad guys are so vocal that somebody who's looking from the outside, he thinks that all of us are racist and Islamophobe and xenophobe and name it. No, only there are few. But as long as the silent majority is silent, people will hear only the bad guys. So this is why it's the job of every one of us to continue being a majority, but to stop being silent. We have to be vocal. We have to say what we mean and mean what we say, and we have to defend the society because it's our society. And the fourth player are the Canadians and Quebecers of Muslim faith. They are the immediate victim, but generally they are the silent victim. There are good reasons for that. First, because in our education we learn to be shy, to be timid, to respect. This is one. Second, many of these people came from countries where they lived through dictatorship, instability, civil war, tragedies, assassination. So these people, when they came here, what they need? Peace. People came from Syria or Lebanon or Iraq or Somalia. What do they need here? They are not coming to make the revolution. They are not coming to cry, El pueblo unido jamás vencido. No, if they wanted to do that, they could stay home. They came here to make a living, to buy a house, to send their kids to school, to have good health, to have a comfortable retirement, and especially be able to sleep at night without having the fear of a policeman or a militiaman knocking on the door. So these people, when somebody does something bad to them, they prefer to shut their mouth instead of calling the police, especially from these authoritarian states. Most of the time the police was the bad guy, was the villain. So you develop a habit not to call the police. And this is why I'm calling my brothers and sisters of Muslim faith, or actually other minorities too. You can be black, you can be Jewish, you can be homosexual, you can be anything, just belonging to a minority that are victims of certain discrimination or racism or whatever. Stand up for your right.
Thank you.
Stand up for your right. This is, I think, I spoke about the four players, and now the fifth player.
We're going to conclude. Yes, we're going to conclude. Thank you, Imam Hassan. So maybe do we have 5 minutes left? Maybe one question, quick. I would like to ask one question to the panelists, and we'll conclude with that. 5 minutes? Yeah, okay. So maybe you gave a couple of examples on how to counter. So briefly, we talk about political examples. Maybe on, for example, for CEOs of companies or leaders of university, one concrete example, action they can take to actually fight this rise of racism and promote cohesive society. Frank.
That gives them time to think. I'll be very brief. I think in employment, and there's no question there's racism in employment, I learned that when I had my first job, and I was able to hire some very, very smart people, and I'm a businessman at a very reasonable price because they had a funny accent. And because they had a funny accent, other people thought they were stupid or whatever. Brilliant people. So in a way, someone else's racism was my benefit. I was able to build my company and be very successful because I didn't see that part. And I would say that any smart business person would make sure that their company is not discriminating against people because they're losing out tremendous talent. So that's one of the things I would put forward.
Thank you, Frank. Summer?
I strongly
Short?
believe education is very important, especially at the public level. Commission scolaire, the school board has to have people of different backgrounds, and the teachers levels at the teachers levels should be very aware to create this kind of feeling of integration amongst their students, and it will help a lot if it starts from primary to secondary to college and universities.
Graham?
I would say political parties, again, back on the political sphere. I'm part of a political party at the municipal level with Projet Montrèal, who believe that the applications for work with the city should be done à l'anonyme.
Definitely.
So that is one of those things. You won't necessarily get beyond the problem of the actual interview, but at least you get the interview. And so in that sense, we eliminate one of the differences. And the other thing is moving towards inclusion. And my political formation at the municipal level is the only one in Quebec, to my knowledge, which believes that permanent residents should also have the right to vote. These people, whether or not they have citizenship, are members of our society, and they pay taxes, and they are part of our community, and they should have a say in terms of the political leadership. And there's lots of places in the world that allow that, and we don't yet, and we will.
Definitely. Thank you, Graham. And Imam, Hassan, shortly.
Quickly,
one?
as Samar said, mainly education, through the official education in the school, but education can be outside the school too. The media, social media, everything, just because mainly this is caused, but most of the time by ignorance. People think that the Muslims is coming from another planet. When they see what the Muslim is as a citizen like everybody else,
Yes, definitely.
we may,
And another example is the Salon Développement Canado-Maghrébin. So thank you for the organizing to allow this. The objective is to network, so please continue to network. And thank you again for the opportunity to lead this panel. Thank you.